I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the New York Winemaker Special series. Across these 8 episodes, recorded in December 2022, we'll be exploring the New York wine scene in the company of 8 different winemakers, covering the Finger Lakes in the first 6 episodes of the series, and Long Island in the last 2. We kick things off today in the company of Ben Riccardi of Osmote Wines. Ben owns 30 acres on Seneca Lake. He's in the process of cover cropping on the path to planting vines, meanwhile making wine from locally sourced fruit in his own winery. Ben gives us his origin story and transition back to his native Finger Lakes. He discusses the international winemaker influences he took back with him. He gives us a Finger Lakes virtual tour, talks winemaking community in the region, takes us through all of the Osmote winemaking projects, and talks the history of sparkling wine in the Finger Lakes. Enjoy.
I grew up here in the Finger Lakes, and ultimately, after a bit of a journey, went to university here and studied winemaking, and then I set out onto the world and did the sort of traveling winemaker thing with these back-to-back cross-hemisphere, wine vintages, because I felt, it was adventure and being a young man, what have you. But I was just learning an incredible amount, and then eventually I moved to California, which has tremendous, so much gravity and pull here in the United States. And as it was, for all the fun and the high quality wine that I was making there, I really wanted to move back home. And I got this opportunity to be the winemaker at City Winery in Manhattan. And that put me, 4 or 5 hours from home. And the chance really, from the traveling winemaker background, here I was landed in New York City and able to synthesize a lot of what I had learned into a really concrete winemaking style and a direction. And that foundation in place, I would continue to come home, visit my mother and my sister here in the Finger Lakes. And especially around 2013, I, was doing some sort of wine tours, going to the cellar doors and meeting with other winemakers. I had worked here in the past, so I had a bevy of connections. And I was tasting wines and realized that we had like a tectonic shift. Just quality really was astounding at that point. In particular, I had a 2010 Chardonnay from Ravines, which is another winery here, and I was floored by it. And I had traveled all around the world with a particular focus on Pinot Noir. So I was making a lot of Chardonnay, and I was here in their tasting room, hearing about their winemaking with a phenomenal wine in my glass. And I just said, I need to come home and, make this wine region my real home, not just where I came from. This is an incredible opportunity. So, first remotely, while still working in Manhattan, I did kind of satellite project here, and with early successes in the 14 and 15 vintage, I moved up here in 2017 with my fiance at the time, and we thought we were kind of trading out some of the hustle and bustle of New York City, and we're going to slow our lives down in the pastoral wine country. Reality is we started a business and nothing has slowed down. but we we have a small family now, and we're just, I mean, we couldn't be happier raising our daughter, a beautiful plot of land, making wine that we feel really strongly about, and just continuing to watch this region that's always been my home really come to the fore in regard to the world of wine.
Yeah, no, amazing, amazing, and yeah, we'll certainly get into the project and the stage where it's at now, which sounds fascinating, and I think as always, it's going to really today capture an interesting moment in your evolution. But what I'd kind of also just like to maybe circle back around a little bit, which I think we'll maybe refer back to later on in the conversation, is it's great that you've mentioned the Ravines Chardonnay that kind of floored you, and you mentioned this kind of traveling winemaker part of the story as well. But I wonder if you wouldn't mind just sort of dipping back into that traveling winemaker part and those different vintages abroad or in California, and maybe just refer to one or two of the people or the experiences that really kind of drew you in and were sort of quite formative maybe during that period of the story.
All of that experience was absolutely like foundational for me. My first commercial vintage straight out of uni was 2008 in Long Island. As a uni student, I had an opportunity to go to Chile, which really put a bug inside of me, if I may. So after the Long Island vintage, I went back to Chile, worked first for a small winery and then a very, very large winery there in the 09 vintage. And that was such an empowering experience, traveling abroad, learning a new language, being so immersed in winemaking, getting so much fast experience, and just being out on my own as a young man. So it kind of went back to back thereafter. Ultimately did Margaret River, West Australia, the Finger Lakes, bouncing back between the Finger Lakes and all these places. Went eventually to Craggy Range in New Zealand, and at there I started to get really focused and was making phenomenal Pinot and just being under really talented winemakers. And I got quite a lot from New Zealand. I was able to travel around, meet with a lot of winemakers. And as it was, I went back the next year, worked on the South Island with Greystone, Dom Maxwell, another truly talented Pinot Noir winemaker. And from there, I went to William Sellum in Russian River, Sonoma, California. Again, focused on Pinot, and just learned so much about focusing on wine's texture, trusting natural processes, and just letting vineyard yeast make the wine. Things that really became core to how I make wine today.
So to transition, really, what I'd like to do, Ben, is really kind of bring us, from all of those travels, really back to where you are now in the Finger Lakes. And, this is a part of the world that I've been lucky enough to visit back in 2018. But I, understand and believe that a lot of my listeners won't ever have visited that part of New York State. So what I'd kind of like to do is give them and give me really a kind of a bit of a snapshot of what your part of the Finger Lakes is like, and what are the sorts of things that we might see if we were to kind of stand out in your vineyards now, or of course in the winter, or maybe in the sort of the opposite in the summer, and how that sort of changes over the year.
I am here on Seneca Lake in the Finger Lakes. which is one of many glacial lakes. They're really unique features. These long but narrow kind of north-south lakes. They were formed during the last ice age. So a glacier figured 2 miles of ice, just slowly grinding from the north to the south, following riverbeds. As such, my farm site is a pretty steep piece of land, which just has this gorgeous view of the pristine lake. And the soils here are, glacially formed naturally. So it's a lot of glacial till, a lot of gravels, kind of shale stone, but also limestone parent material in the gravels, and it's all over a bedrock of shale. And so what that means when you look at it, you've got steep slopes on shale bedrock draining into a gorgeous lake. In actuality, if you walk around here, it's waterfalls every couple of miles. That's how the lake is fed from the hills. So it's a gorgeous spot here. Right now, I mean, it's horrifically cold. The ground froze this week. We're below zero consistently, 0 centigrade, consistently each day right now. But it will come back to life in May. First with the cherry blossoms and the lilacs, and it'll just be another glorious summer here in the Finger Lakes. We are a more humid region, so we struggle with some varieties like Pinot Noir, but we do exceptionally well with Chardonnay and Cabernet Franc. And then, with the real cold that we have a real nice selection of very cold hardy hybrids as well. So I am on the east side of Seneca. I should know at this moment in time, I have not planted vineyards, and I am buying all of my fruit. I buy predominantly here from the east side of Seneca and the west side of Cayuga Lake, the lake that is to my east. So being here on the east side of Seneca with steep slopes, I'm incident more to the warm afternoon sun and get a lot of nice reflection of the sunlight off the lake. The jet stream, the prevailing winds kind of come from west towards the east, so kind of blows cool air into the vineyard very, very consistently. The Finger Lakes, of course, we're the middle of New York, kind of protected in the west by Lake Erie, and in the north by Lake Ontario. So both of those shelter us from cold Arctic blasts coming down from Canada. And then the Finger Lakes themselves and their own unique kind of lake effect are what really give us that last bit of warmth that sustain us through the winter. But also, being deep glacial lakes that stay quite cold actually through the summer, they delay the bud break here and kind of cool us off, particularly at night in the warm summer.
So yeah, it sounds like a fabulous combination of geographical and climatical influences coming together.
Yeah. It's a very special place. And the world's figuring it out. So my immediate neighbor is the Hillock and Hobbs estate, which is planted, of course, by Paul Hobbs, the prominent California winemaker. He's got 70 acres just downhill of me, so that's to my west, just slightly closer to the lake shore. 70 acres with about 25 planted. My site historically was a juice grape vineyard. All of those juice grapes have been removed, and now we've got the land under cover crops. Just happens to be winter rye right now, so we're working really sustainably and slowly to build the quality and the health of the soil in advance of planting the grapevines. Another cool project that I do here, something when you come and visit, you may see, we raise pigs at a micro scale, 6 to 10 pigs at a time.
Yeah.
But one of my old juice grape blocks was never really fully torn out. So we've put the electric fence around it, and we do kind of an intensive grazing pasture rotation of the pigs there to help erase the grapevines.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's something it takes me back. It's something that I saw when I was doing some volunteering and work experience down in Australia, and we did kind of just the same thing. And that you get a really strong till, don't you, when you just
my goodness, they can move an incredible amount of earth. And this was a project we started during the beginning of COVID. There was a lot of disruption in animal rearing, what have you. So we started with like a Yorkshire breed, didn't root that much. And then the next year we got heritage breeds like Berkshires. And that was paired with the vintage 2021 where it rained well beyond what's normal. And then with all the wet earth, the pigs just rooted everything, and it was mud everywhere. We had to rotate the pastures constantly.
One thing, actually, it's really great. Hearing about the processes and getting into the site that you're on, and it's kind of taken me back a little bit to conversations I've had with winemakers over in Washington State, really, about how a lot of people and sommeliers and people that kind of have been wanting to live the winemaker dream for a while and haven't been able to do it, have found that there's a community and there's actually also an accessibility of price in Washington State that they weren't able to find in other parts of the States or even kind of other countries. And I just wonder, is there an element of that happening also in New York State as well, where there's kind of fresh people coming in and working alongside the more established people and maybe just say something about that kind of attraction, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that was some of what pulled me from California to look at the Finger Lakes. There's a very attainable future here still. Land is not cheap per se, but in the grand scale of things, it is very attainable. So definitely, I came in with very little at start and have built up my thing over a decade. And at this point, now I have the privilege within my winery facility. I actually rent space to another husband and wife sommelier couple who have made the transition from sommelier to winemaker vigneron. They bought a small plot of land and bought an established vineyard and make wine from their grapes and purchase grapes in my facility. terrific opportunity for them and some
Yeah.
other smaller outfits coming. I mean, granted too, you have the force of an absolutely famous international winemaker with Paul Hobbs right next door to my vineyard. So there's a lot of opportunity and people moving in across the spectrum.
Which I think is important, isn't it? Because there's something to be learned, I think, in making wine at all scales, and I think that's why it sounds as though having those different scales and different approaches and different outlooks, within the same community. I think it can no doubt help everybody, as ideas are shared and people kind of get to taste one another's wines.
Yeah, absolutely. With regard to scale, though, the Finger Lakes is really interesting. I go back again to say once more, we are a very cold winemaking region, but through the magic of the lakes, there is a narrow bit of land where we can sustain vines and keep them alive through the winter cold. But it has a really unique effect on our region. No one has really achieved any sort of massive scale. A very large winery here would be someone who might be farming 200 or 300 acres, kind of, a large winery here so often feels like a place that's got 30, 40, 50 acres under vine. 10,000 cases perhaps. It's all sort of micro lot here in the Finger Lakes, which is pretty cool. But there are people with different levels of capitalization. When you compare myself to some of the others.
No, it's really interesting, and again, I think it's great that you've traveled to those other regions and you've seen, and you can basically put your growing site into the scale of the Finger Lakes, but then you can also put the Finger Lakes into the scale of all those other types of operations that you've seen and heard about all around the world. So super interesting. And one thing I would like to do, because again, I think it's great that we're speaking, at a time when you haven't planted the vines yet, and you've said the sites from where you're buying where you're buying the fruit in terms of where you're most drawn to. And I wonder if you wouldn't just give us a little snapshot really of what are the types of grapes maybe that you're buying, and maybe at the same time what might be some of the criteria that you're asking for and looking for in the fruit you're buying to enable it to match with your winemaking style when it gets that far.
Yes. So I kind of have two focuses here with Osmote. The first being, your classic French varieties. I'm very excited about what I see as the big three for the region: Chardonnay, Cabernet Franc, and Riesling. So I tend to make Chardonnay raised in large 400-liter oak barrels, and that is what I do with fruit from my Seneca Lake sites. So those east side of the lake vineyard sites that get some more of the warmer afternoon sun and can push slightly higher level of ripeness. And they're steeper vineyard sites with very gravelly soils. So going back to the fact that we're kind of a humid region, a lot of rainfall during the growing season, these steeper sites and gravelly sites drain the water away from the vine and keep the berry size nice and small, full of concentration. And those vineyard sites are the ones that marry really well with my oak program, and really bring the oak in as a just subtle note of complexity more than like a top coat sort of. With the Cabernet Franc, I love a lot of stem inclusion. So naturally, I always want to work with the established growers who have a really sustainable vineyard program, kind of doing responsible and minimal amounts of spray and avoiding herbicide. And then they've got a hand harvest for me. And labor is a real issue here, but these, a lot of these growers that I'm working with are doing migrant labor programs like the H2A. So they bring in the talent pool who can select and harvest the grapes in a timely manner. And then the other kind of half of my program is a look back into the history of the Finger Lakes to try maybe to find what I think could be the future of viticulture all around, and that's with the hybrid grapes. I find it really, really interesting. I had worked in the Maule region in Chile in 2009, kind of at what I think was the onset with these winemakers going out into the bush and finding the forgotten Pais, mission grape vineyards, and bringing those back to life and trying to make natural wine with those ancient vines. And I thought that was such an admirable project and something so interesting. And immediately I was like, oh man, what a bummer we don't have crazy old vineyards like that here in the Finger Lakes. And as I thought about it a little bit more, I was like, actually, we have ancient vines here, but they are the hybrids that the old guys planted in the 70s. So I kind of came back around and chose to lift those grapes and do something fun and different with them. So I work with some old Cornell interspecific hybrid plantings where farmers planted in like 73, 78. That's Cayuga White from Cornell University. Also Deschanec, which is an even older hybrid that actually came from France back to the U.S. That was planted in 73. That vineyard. And then I have one grower who is a little bit further from the lake, and what that means here, you have again talking about the steepness of our vineyards. If you're further from the lake, you're not just further from the water. You're also picking up a little bit more elevation. So he's at a higher elevation site where it's definitely going to be colder in the winter, and he's growing some next generation hybrids like Marquette, which came from the University of Minnesota, and it's extremely cold hardy. And I do a red sparkling pet nat from that vineyard. So yeah, I have a really, really wide range, classic wines, very international wines, but some very experimental, kind of verging on natural wine styles. Just trying to touch on the history of this place. And, when it comes to planting my own vineyard in due course, I very much want to do Cabernet Franc and Chardonnay, but I'm thinking about kind of the next generation hybrids too. because vineyard sustainability has to be first and foremost, and we've got to ask ourselves, how do we spray less in the vineyard? And I think these grapes are the answer.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and as ever, I think with an interesting guest and an interesting region, it's I could kind of talk to you all day, but one thing that I would just kind of refer back to is, and what you're talking about there is reminding me of a conversation I had with Pascaline Lepeltier when I was in New York, and her project with Nathan Kendall, she touched on that as well in way back in episode 151, where she was talking about the amount of sparkling wine that used to come out of the Finger Lakes, and the amount that used to be even exported to France, and these sort of huge quantities, and very high quality and premium pricing. And I think it's fascinating that you've uncovered really, and you're exploring the modern history really, and the history that is there, and is maybe overlooked by somebody who's coming completely new to New York, and is maybe only hearing about, and is only seeing the Cab Francs, the Chardonnays, the Rieslings, which are of course a huge part of the story as well.
Yeah, there is so much history here, and I think you really have to look to New York as the beginning of winemaking in the United States. So it is important to touch on that history, and that history affects me, really in both directions. With all of that sparkling in the past, that there was a moment in time where a New York winery could poach a Dom Perignon or a Veuve Clicquot winemaker. It happened in the like the 30s or the 50s when Charles Fournier came here. He was supposed to be the winemaker at Veuve Clicquot, and he came here instead to Hammondsport, New York. And so that means a lot, not only for my sparkling, Petnat hybrid Cuga White program, but his influence. He was planting some of the first Chardonnay vineyards here in the Finger Lakes. So, if Chardonnay has been what I originally founded the company on, it's kind of been the crux of Osmote. It's because I'm pulling from some of his earliest plantings, or really old plantings that were influenced by what he was doing in the 1950s.
Yeah. So again, super interesting. And what I'll do really, I think really in closing out, our conversation, which I've absolutely loved, is really just to touch on, getting down to really a little bit your production, which currently I believe sits at around 2,000 bottles a year.
2,000 cases. 2,000.
Sorry, 2,000 cases. Okay. So 2,000 cases per year. And also then linking that back to the UK market, where I believe you import with Woodwinters, and maybe, giving us an introduction to what some of my listeners in the UK might actually be able to track down and find over here.
Lucky for me, really kind of almost the whole range has been imported by Woodwinters, and that would include the wine, first and foremost, which is very near and dear to my heart, the oak Chardonnay from Seneca Lake. And once again, that's very classic style Chardonnay, fermented naturally in large oak barrels with a lot of complexity and nuance. I have lovely, very bright, fresh Cabernet Franc with, lower alcohol there in the UK. I also do a stainless steel style, much more fruit forward Chardonnay, and then look and Riesling, of course. A dry Riesling, which is actually fermented in my oldest large format oak barrels, with an emphasis trying to add textural complexity, lusciousness to the mouthfeel, because again, it's a very cold region here. We have a very strong sense of acidity, so you have to balance the strong acids, and I do that with a little bit of leesiness coming from the neutral oak. And then, the hybrid line is there too. So that's a white sparkling Pétillant Naturel made from Cayuga White, which is a kind of indigenous grape from the local university, Cornell. I've got a red sparkling Pet Nat, combination of two really interesting red hybrid grapes and a little bit of Cabernet Franc. And even Deschanec, which is a very old French hybrid grape that was brought back to the U.S., say like the 30s, and with that, it's kind of ancient vine, 50-year-old vineyard, and I actually co-ferment that with Chardonnay skins to give it, where hybrids typically aren't known for a lot of textural complexity. My thought process has been, can we get a sense of tonicity from the Chardonnay grapes, the skins?
A huge thanks to Ben Riccardi of Osmote Wines, an absolutely cracking way to get the series off and running. Do visit osmotewine.com, where you can learn more about the project and find their main social media handles. Do please help to amplify this episode and the series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/476. And of course, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. Next time on Interpreting Wine New York Winemaker Special, in episode 477, I'll be speaking with Julia Hoyle, winemaker at Hosmer Estate Winery. Make sure you've subscribed to Interpreting Wine Podcast to be alerted when the episode goes live. See you then.